Theory in some way. So I got marinated in this. I got steeped in this, and I understood it very well. And after the long-term capital fiasco, I looked back and said, there's something wrong here. I mean, these guys were not dumb. They're not bad people. They're friends of mine. They're very smart people. But I said, if they got it this badly wrong, there must be something wrong with the modeling. And I went back and I spent 10 years studying physics, statistics, applied mathematics, graph theory, network theory, behavioral psychology.
Welcome to the Power and Market Report. I'm Albert Liu. Welcoming back to the program, Mr. James Rickards. He's the editor of the Strategic Intelligence Newsletter and the New York Times best-selling author of The Death of Money, Currency Wars, and the New Case for Gold. His latest book, The Road to Ruin, The Global Elite's Secret Plan for the Next Financial Crisis, is available for pre-order now and officially launches on November 15th. James, thank you very much for coming back on the program. How are you?
I'm fine, Albert. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be with you.
It's always great to speak with you. Thanks to your people and your publisher, I have a copy right here of the new book, which, as I mentioned on the intro, launches November 15th. I noticed it's already one of the best sellers on Amazon.com in pre-order. And as I was joking with you before we rolled, Jim, I am a slow reader, so usually it's a challenge for me to get through a book before it goes out of print. Thanks to you, I've actually finished a book before it launches. And I have to say that I think, this is my opinion, that this is your best book yet. And one of the reasons is because I don't think there's anyone else who could have written this book. You have a unique perspective, you have a unique background, and not only is it unique, it's very relevant to what's going on today. So can you tell me first, how does this book fit in to the series that you're writing now?
Well, first of all, Albert, thank you, and thank you for the kind words about the book. You're right. There are different ways to buy the book. You can do Barnes & Noble, Amazon, independent booksellers, but Amazon has rankings, and they have numerous subcategories. There's, the overall books, but they have a category called Money and Monetary Policy, and we're number one in that category, but we're competing with books that are already in the bookstore. So even the pre-sale is competing with books, as I said, that have already been published out in the bookstores, and we're number one. Very, very grateful for that, and I thank all the folks who are interested in it. The Road to Ruin is actually volume 3 of a projected quartet, 4-book series starting with Currency Wars, The Death of Money, The Road to Ruin, and then down the road there'll be another book, but that's something for 2018. We can talk about that later. But Road to Ruin is volume 3. Really following, if it just is a meta theme, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, if you will. Think of it as the 4 horsemen of the financial apocalypse. So this is volume 3, the Black Horse. I talk about that in the book a little bit. But metaphors aside, it's a continuation of a study of the future of the international monetary system. What's different about this book, Currency Wars and the Death of Money, in different ways, talked about the instability in the system, warned you about the coming crisis, provided a lot of historical background and some science, ways to think about it. This book has some of that, but it also, instead of warning you about the crisis, it puts you in the crisis. It says, hey, the crisis is here. What will the reaction function of the global elites be? What is their plan to deal with the crisis? What specific steps will they take? How does it affect you as an investor? So I really put you inside the crisis. And to do this as a device, I look at 3 crises, 1998, 2008, and then keeping with the 10-year tempo, 2018. So projected crisis. And by the way, I'm not putting a hard stake in the ground saying, 2018, like clockwork, we're going to have a crisis. The truth is it could happen tomorrow. There's no reason why it has to be 2 years out. But that's a reasonable estimate, but something that investors should be prepared for tomorrow. But I'm using 2018 to keep up this 10-year tempo. Now, what happened in 1998? That was the Russia long-term capital meltdown. A lot of investors remember it. I was very involved in that personally. I was the general counsel of long-term capital management, which was the hedge fund that was in the eye of the storm. I negotiated that bailout by Wall Street. And we came hours away from closing every stock and bond market in the world. That's how bad it would have been. That's not an exaggeration. Alan Greenspan, chairman of the Fed at the time, Bob Rubin, secretary of the Treasury at the time, both testified to that effect. And as I say, I was in the room with the Treasury, with the Fed, with the major banks, financial leaders around the world, a lot of lawyers running around when we actually did the closing. And we were desperate to get it done before Tokyo opened that morning. And then later that day, September 29th, the Fed cut interest rates, cut them again at an emergency meeting. We kind of foamed the runways, brought the plane in for a landing, and didn't blow up the world, but came extremely close. 2008, same thing. We were days away from the sequential collapse of every bank in the world. So Bear Stearns failed in March 2008, then Fannie and Freddie in June, July 2008, then Lehman in September 2008. They were falling like dominoes, one after the other. After Lehman, it would have been Morgan Stanley, then Goldman Sachs, then Citi, B of A, JP Morgan. They all would have fallen, except that the Fed stepped in and truncated that process. And this is an important distinction between a man-made complex system such as capital markets and a natural complex system such as a seismic zone or an earthquake, in other words. They have the same dynamics, the same math. The complexity theory describes both of them. I explain all this in the book. The difference is that in a natural system, let's say a seismic zone, when an earthquake starts, you can't stop it. The earthquake has to just run its course. You can't stop it. But when a financial earthquake starts, you can stop it by truncating it with intervention. But the problem is, imagine hypothetically you could stop an earthquake in the middle. You can't do it, but imagine you could. All of that energy would be stored up. An earthquake is just the release of energy. If you stopped it hypothetically, the energy wouldn't go away. It would just be stored up for the future. Same thing in a financial earthquake. You can truncate it with policy, but you don't solve the problem. That financial energy is stored up waiting for the next earthquake, and it's coming soon. Now, how did the Fed actually do this in 2008? They did a couple things. We know over time they increased their balance sheet from $800 billion to $4 trillion. That's $3.2 trillion of new money printing. But they did a lot more than that. They did a swap agreement with the European Central Bank where they printed $10 trillion. This was not known at the time. It came out a few years later, partly as a result of Dodd-Frank. But what was going on, Albert, was that the European commercial banks lent money in dollars, and they had to borrow in dollars to fund those loans. A lot of those borrowings came from the commercial paper market, bank CDs, short-term paper. Americans were panicked. They were pulling their money out of the money market funds, so those money market funds couldn't roll over the bank IOUs. So the European banks turned to their central bank. The European Central Bank is lender of last resort, but there was one problem. The European Central Bank prints euros, but it can't print dollars, and they were desperate for dollars. So what happened was the European Central Bank printed up a bunch of euros. The Federal Reserve printed up a bunch of dollars. They swapped them, and that gave the European Central Bank the dollars they needed to bail out their own banking system. In addition to that, the Fed and the FDIC together, they guaranteed every bank deposit in America, regardless of insurance size. So insurance at the time was $250,000. They gave them unlimited. So if you had $1 million, you were a small business, had $1 million of working capital in your account, that got guaranteed, unlimited size. They also guaranteed every money market fund in America. And there was no legal obligation to do that, but they went ahead and did it anyway. So that was the extent to which they truncated the panic. Now come forward to 2018. None of the problems have been solved. The biggest banks, the so-called too big to fail banks today, they're bigger. They have a larger percentage of the banking assets. They have much larger derivatives books. All this financial energy, as I call it, has been stored up, waiting for the next earthquake. It's just a matter of time. But here's the difference. The best description of a financial panic I've ever heard is that everybody wants their money back. You see people, they say, well, I've got money in the stock market, money in the bond market, et cetera. I say, no, you don't. You have stocks and bonds, but you don't have money. If you want money, you've got to sell the stocks and bonds, probably at the worst possible time, and try to get your money if you can. So in 1998, everybody wanted their money back. The Fed printed the money and gave it to them. In 2008, everybody wanted their money back. The Fed printed the money and gave it to them. In 2018, everybody's going to want their money back. By the way, if not sooner than 2018. The difference is you're not going to get your money back. They can't do it again. They're at the outer limit. They have not normalized their balance sheets. What they're going to do is lock down the system. They're going to money market funds are going to suspend redemptions. Banks will be closed. ATMs will be reprogrammed so you can only get, say, $300 a day for gas and groceries. Stock exchanges will be closed. Instead of printing the money and giving it to you, they're going to say you can't get your money. Now, by the way, they'll say it's temporary. right? Temporary until the IMF can ride to the rescue with, trillions of SDRs. That's their world money, the special drawing rights. But remember, in August 1971, Richard Nixon said he was suspending the gold standard temporarily. Those were his words 45 years ago. That still has not been reversed. But so that's what's happening. That's what's going to happen. And I talk about all this in the book in great detail.
James, you talk about all of that in the book, and I actually love the analogy of market crashes and earthquakes. I kind of liken it to a compressed spring. They can push the pause button on it, but they can't. They got to dissipate that energy. So you talk about that, and that is certainly not a rosy scenario. But I want to augment what you just said, because they say, like, don't judge a book by its cover. And so I think that's the case here. And don't get the wrong idea. I love the title. It's a catchy title, great artwork. But this is not a typical doomsday story. This is a real thoughtful look at the evolution of the world financial system, the evolution of American politics and culture, and sort of set in the broad view of Western civilization. And reading it was just a joy. Looking through the notes and the sources here, if I ever got to meet your wife, I'd like to ask her, does James read a lot? Not because I don't know the answer, but because I'd love to see the look on her face. You look at these sources. This is not an exhaustive list, but here in the sources you have, the Journal of Business, okay, the Journal of Atmospheric Sciences, the American Journal of Physics. You have Eugen von Bauwerk. I think it's his PhD dissertation. A lot of other notable economists here. You really do your homework. And no one can accuse you of tunnel vision here, because you really take into a lot when you do this.
Well, thank you, Albert. And that's important to me, and I hope the readers enjoy it and appreciate it. But I don't like to make claims, and I never make claims without providing backup. Now, there are a lot of people running around. They'll say, gold's going to $5,000, the world's coming to an end, the system's going to collapse, etc. I might even agree, but if you just make the claim and don't back it up with something, it can be history, it can be science, it can be psychology, it can be mathematics, it can be a lot of things. I actually use all of them because I'm not really interested in debating claims. I am interested in debating the analysis behind it. To me, that's where the meat is. And so it's about a 300-page book. There are 151 footnotes, then many more, as you point out, sources and articles that I use. So the claims are there, the forecast is there, but it's all backed up. And what I want to do is, as I say, debate the analysis. If you disagree with the analysis, that's fine. I welcome disagreement. I learn from it. I'm happy to have those debates, but I'm not really interested in debating claims. I like all the backup, and it is all in the book. The other thing I try hard to do is put it in plain English. Now, that's not the same as dumbing it down. Nothing is dumbed down. The book analyzes things at hopefully a very high level. But if you use a little plain English, some metaphors, some stories, it makes it very accessible to the reader. There are some equations in there, but you don't have to wrestle those to the ground. I mean, they're there for those who want to do it, but you can just sort of flow through it and see the analysis. And so hopefully that comes through for the reader, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I like to put that backup in there in addition to stating my forecast.
Right, and one of the things that comes up over and over again, not just in your book, but critics of the Fed and what's going on now, is the modeling. The modeling is very poor, and von Mises wrote that if you want to attack a thesis, you can attack the reasoning, or you can attack the assumptions. The reasoning is usually pretty good because these people are very smart, but the assumptions are just horrendous. And so you attack the models that they use, the stochastics, the idea of normal distributions, the idea of no memory in the system, and that's what leads you to complexity theory. Can you talk about the idea that price movements are not a random walk? There's feedback, there's memory, there's agents. There's several times I was reading this book, I had to put it down, and I thought, finally someone is saying this, someone gets it. Talk about that, just the memory in the system, how people their decisions are correlated and related to what they've seen in the near past?
Sure, Albert. There's a list of assumptions, I think it's a good way to put it, that are the foundation, the actual bedrock of modern financial theory. And by the way, it takes a while for things to percolate out of the university into the markets and then finally into, let's call it, popular culture or a wider understanding. That process can take 30 or 40 or 50 years. You know, we all credit Charles Darwin with the theory of evolution, and that's fine. It was his theory, but it was really Thomas Huxley years later who popularized it and kind of put it into public discourse. So that does take a matter of time. When I was at Long-Term Capital Management, we had 16 PhDs on our executive committee, on our risk management committee, all from MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Chicago. I call them the usual suspects. Two of them were Nobel Prize winners in the kind of theories we're talking about, Myron Scholes and Robert C. Merton. The others were equally prominent, really the fathers, if you will, of modern financial theory in some ways. So I got marinated in this. I got steeped in this, and I understood it very well. And after the long-term capital fiasco, I looked back and said, there's something wrong here. I mean, these guys were not dumb. They're not bad people. They're friends of mine. They're very smart people. But I said, if they got it this badly wrong, there must be something wrong with the modeling. And I went back and I spent 10 years studying physics, statistics, applied mathematics, graph theory, network theory, behavioral psychology, et cetera, all those sources that you talk about in the book, to figure out what it is. Now, the assumptions are, markets are efficient, which means they incorporate all information in real time, that you can't beat the market because the market knows everything you know, and you can't kind of get ahead of that. Two, risk is normally distributed. Normally distributed means, if I flip a coin 100 times, I'm going to get about 50 heads and 50 tails. Yeah, it might be, 49 heads and 51 tails, or 48-52, but it's not going to be 20-80. I'm not going to get 20 heads and 80 tails. The odds of that are almost infinitesimal. So those extreme events, those extreme distributions don't happen, that over time it comes very close to that 50-50 outcome. And that's what when you were saying there's no memory, each coin toss is independent. So, if I flip 3 heads in a row, a lot of people say, you had 3 heads in a row, next one's got to be tails. False. I mean, that really is 50-50. That's called the gambler's fallacy, by the way. Well, that is true of coin toss.